Thanks for joining everyone for this month's monthly webinar for the Park Service's Connected Conservation Initiative, which was formerly known as Scaling Up. This is Brian Fainer, and I help support the effort. As most of you know, our Connected Conservation webinars focus on how the Park Service and our partners can use various tools and strategies to conserve park resources as well as landscapes and seascapes. We host a webinar at least once a month, and this month we've got two. And you can find those recordings of past webinars on our internal Connected Conservation Toolkit, which is accessible to all DOI staff, and also we'll post it to the Network for Landscape Conservation website. And I'll drop both of those links to our internal toolkit and then also to the external Network for Landscape Conservation website, again, where you can access other webinars. We will be posting this webinar soon following today's presentation, if not today, later this week. Throughout the presentation, feel free to plug in any questions that you have into the questions box. After following the presentation, we'll revisit those questions, and then we'll also have time, we should have time to open up the phone lines where folks can actually just ask a question through their phone. With that said, I think we're ready to get going. Today's presenters is Beth Vogel with the Forest Service, and she's the Pacific Crest Trail National Scenic Trail coordinator, and then also Megan Wargo with the Pacific Crest Trail Association. And with that, the floor is yours, Beth and Megan.
Great. Well, hello, everyone. This is Beth Vogel, and I have the great honor of having my avocation be my vocation. And so as we talk about the PCT and my job as trail administrator, I want you to know that the stories of connection that I hear for the PCT and the connection to place are some of the greatest benefits of my job. And so a little bit about me, I was a junior in nursing school at the University of Pittsburgh when I started hiking on the Appalachian Trail. And in 2 summers, I finished all of the AT and then started a 10-year pediatric nursing career because my parents would have killed me had I not gone on with that degree. But eventually, my passion for wild places and trails helped me transition to a master's in forestry from Colorado State. And I'm in my 27th year of working for the U.S. Forest Service. The first 17 were on the White River National Forest in Colorado doing wilderness and trails. And then I've been in this position since 2007. So great job, and I'm really honored to be able to visit with you about the trail today.
And hello, I'm Megan Wargo, the Director of Land Protection for the Pacific Crest Trail Association, or PCTA. And it's PCTA's mission to protect, preserve, and promote the Pacific Crest National Scenic Trail as a world-class experience for hikers and equestrians, and all of the values provided by wild and scenic lands. I've been with PCTA for about 3.5 years now, and prior to coming to PCTA, I had 10 years of experience working at local, regional, and national land trusts, including Pacific Forest Trust, Trust for Public Land, Piedmont Land Conservancy, and the Kachemak Heritage Land Trust. I hold a Master of Environmental Management degree from Duke University and a Bachelor of Arts in Environmental Studies, Economics, and Politics from Claremont McKenna College.
So we're going to start with a little overview of the PCT, and it's important as we talk about the trail that others know that it is designated by Congress as a National Scenic Trail, but we're going to abbreviate it by just talking about PCT. 2,650 miles. This is the 50th anniversary of the National Trail System Act. It's also the 50th birthday of the PCT and the AT. They're sister trails, and were the first 2 to be designated in '68 by President Johnson. One of the things that's interesting to me about the PCT is that its roots come from the John Muir, Oregon Skyline, and Crest trails, and the genesis of a single trail from Mexico to Canada along the crest of the Sierra and Cascade mountain ranges began in the 1920s. This trail connects communities and fabulous wild places and is located within an hour's drive of 25 million people. Next slide. So the challenging and fun thing about my job is coordination. So the PCT goes through 25 national forests. We laugh about how we count this because many of the forests are actually combined. So if you have the Okanagan Wenatchee National Forests, they have one National Forest Supervisor, and we count that as one. So when I say 25, it's actually really more than 25. 6 national parks, 7 BLM units, 5 California state parks. There's 5 national monuments now, and the trail is over half designated wilderness, and there's 48 wilderness areas that the trail goes through. We manage the PCT in a collaborative management style. So what that means is that the U.S. Forest Service is the trail administrator. That designation comes by Congress through the Secretary of Agriculture to the Forest Service. But within the National Trail System Act, it highlights and celebrates the connection to citizens and volunteers. And so we work together with PCTA to manage, maintain, and protect the trail. Megan will tell you a little bit more about PCTA, but what you need to know is that in 2017, they contributed 91,000 hours of volunteer service with a total of 13,000 members and 2,100 volunteers. Next slide. So we've talked about the 50th birthday of the National Trail System Act. It was on October 2nd. So as you all plan this coming year, know that that day is around the corner. It's also my mother's birthday, so 2 reasons to celebrate. Within the legislation, each national scenic and historic trail has a little bit different of enabling legislation. So it's important as we talk about the PCT today that you all reference the enabling legislation of any other national trail that you're thinking about, because it's not all the same. The AT and the PCT, since they were designated at the same time, are very similar, but subsequent legislations are different. Within the Trail System Act, in Section 7, under the Administration and Development of National Trails, it specifically allows federal agencies to acquire lands or interests in lands through cooperative agreements, donations, and purchases. And that can be with donated or appropriated funds. And so as we start to talk about land acquisition and protection of the PCT, sometimes folks ask the question, well, how can the Forest Service buy land outside of national forest boundaries? And the answer to that is the authority lies within the National Trail System itself. There is also a piece about condemnation authority in the National Trail System Act. And so we all know that it's a last resort, and it is not something that is currently used, but that authority for the PCT does exist. Next slide. So in 1993, the PCT was completed. We had a golden spike ceremony, and this is in Soledad Canyon. And the woman that you see on the right's name is Nancy DuPont, and she was the first executive director of the Pacific Crest Trail Association. And I'm using the word complete with quotes around it, because what you also need to know is, while it is true that mostly we have legal access the full length of the trail, there are easements that are as narrow as 10 feet wide. And so as we speak towards conservation and protecting the trail experience, the next couple of slides will show you what the issues are with having narrow easements for the trail. Next slide. Okay, so this is private land. It's not federal land. The slide on the right is in the Columbia Gorge National Scenic Area. And there's another picture that I couldn't find that actually has a tree that's about, a section of tree that's about 10 feet tall. It's been cut at the top. Up above, it was cut up above where the trail service mark was so that hikers could still find their way. So this really speaks to the importance of the trail foreground or view shed. I think about that within a half a mile of centerline. What you can see as being the area that we're most interested in protecting, but certainly middle ground and background are also really important. Next slide. Soledad Canyon is where the Golden Spike ceremony happened. And again, this is the PCT. This is our trail easement, but it's an example of how the trail isn't complete. Next slide. And this is not an easement, it's actually a license agreement to use a shoulder of a road. So one of the other challenges in having continuous connection from Mexico to Canada is, what is it if you can't find the right place to go through, or what if landowners aren't willing to sell? And so we've had an active acquisition project in this area. We've acquired about half the land we need to move the trail off the road, but there's one key landowner who's not interested yet in selling. And so this is ongoing work where it's pretty obvious what the dangers would be to foot and horse travel on a shoulder of a road, especially with a blind curve such as this. Important work, and we'll definitely, with the long lens on where we go to protect the trail, we'll need to get moved. Next slide. So this is one of the things that I'm most proud of. The Pacific Crest Trail Association completed in 2009 with the assistance of federal land managers an inventory of parcels of land that were needed to be acquired to protect the trail experience in the trail corridor. And so we did a course filter where we looked at everything within a half mile of center line of the trail that was privately owned, and made some adjustments based on knowledge of either local agency staff or local PCTA staff, and came up with this land acquisition inventory that has about 1,550 parcels in it. What's important to know is that it's a course filter, so as we have availability and as other things come up, it's only a place to start. It's not our last place, but it has been really helpful for thinking about what our strategy is for protecting the trail experience. The other thing that makes this great is that PCTA actually got a grant and worked with Alta Planning and Design, which is a private company, to create this. And anyone who's ever dove into county parcel maps knows that to actually assemble this was a really large feat. So I have a great deal of gratitude for that landmark work that was done for the PCT. Next slide.
Okay. So about 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, PCTA received a generous private donation that allowed us to expand the land protection program that we have within our organization. And as we look to do that, we really wanted to expand the capacity of trail protection trail-wide, and not move into a space and try and take over land protection anywhere, but add on to the great work that was already happening. And so when we set out to expand this program, one of our first steps was to reach out to the other land trusts and conservation organizations working in areas that overlap with the PCT trail corridor. We identified nearly 40 national, regional, and local land trusts up and down the trail and reached out to each of them to set up phone calls and meetings. These initial meetings were a chance to introduce the PCTA, our mission, and to share our land protection goals with all of these organizations, as well as a chance to learn about the conservation priorities of these various groups and to see where we might have some overlap to work together. We had very positive reactions from these early meetings and identified a number of different partnership models to work with these various organizations up and down the trail. And I'll just give you a really quick overview of these various ones. First, acquisition partners. PCTA has entered into option agreements with some of these other land trust organizations, and we've been able to pool our resources to acquire a property for the PCT together. Second, financial partners. PCTA has provided funding to another organization to help cover a portion of the project acquisition costs. And by doing this, we're helping to make the project happen while not having to use our organizational time and resources on the real estate transaction steps, which were handled by the other nonprofit. Third, advocacy partners. PCTA has written support letters to help support federal and state funding requests for acquisitions by land trusts on the PCT. Fourth, project referrals. PCTA has seen project referrals go both ways. We've referred landowners to other organizations, and likewise, we have had other organizations refer landowners to us. And by having relationships with all of these land trusts up and down the trail and a mutual understanding of our conservation goals, we make sure that the right party is working with a willing landowner that wants to see their property conserved. And lastly, we've been able to be advisors on conservation easement language. So PCTA has worked with land trusts to help provide our trail expertise into drafting conservation easement language to protect the trail corridor in a conservation easement that another nonprofit is going to hold along the trail. And last, I'd like to give you an overview of the Stevens Pass project. So the Stevens Pass acquisition is a really good example of what partnerships can achieve for the public good. Now, imagine you're a through hiker that's made it 2,463 miles on the PCT. You've hiked through desert heat, mosquitoes, snow, water crossings, and shin splints. And you're rounding a bend on the PCT less than 200 miles from the northern terminus, and you run into a fence across the trail with a no trespassing sign. And there are no apparent alternative routes around this private parcel. So this was a potential reality. Just a couple of years ago, PCTA received a letter from a landowner in Stevens Pass, Washington, who owned 402 acres with 3/4 of a mile of the PCT on it. And in this case, there was never a trail easement secured over this private parcel, and the PCT was in trespass. The landowner stated in his letter that he would like to sell the property and that if we failed to purchase it, he intended to close off public access to the PCT. This property has been an acquisition priority for decades, and the Stevens Pass is approximately 78 miles east of Seattle. So it's an important part of a PCT through hike, but it's also an important PCT access point for the millions of people that live in the greater Seattle area, both to get on and use the trail as well as to access the Henry M. Jackson and Glacier Peak wilderness areas. The landowner indicated that they were not willing to work with the Forest Service, so PCTA was able to step in as a partner and work with the landowner to negotiate the purchase. Throughout the due diligence process, we worked very closely with the U.S. Forest Service Realty staff to ensure that it would meet all of our due diligence would meet all the federal acquisition standards. And we were able to go through and correct some survey issues, remove structures and debris from the property to clear the way for the Forest Service acquisition. With our option agreement expiring in November, we were quickly approaching that deadline, and we learned that the Land and Water Conservation Fund money that the Forest Service had lined up for this acquisition was temporarily unavailable due to borrowing within the federal budget to cover the cost of fighting wildfires. We went to the landowner and they refused to extend our option to buy the property. And so PCTA was able to call upon partnership again, and we were able to engage another nonprofit partner, the Conservation Fund, through their conservation loan program. And this allowed PCTA to step in and acquire the property before the option expired. And I can tell you that that was a very nail-biting time because we finished and acquired the property 8 hours before our option expired. PCTA went on and we held the property until the Forest Service was able to acquire it this spring. And I wanted to finish on this example because I think that this is a really good example of a high priority acquisition for the public that could not have happened without the partnership and the trust and good communication that we had every way throughout, through every step of this project. And with that, we'd like to open it up for questions.
Megan, before we go there, I just had one more thing to share with the group. In thinking about national park land, there aren't as many in holdings as there are on national forest land. And so be sure as you're thinking about how does this apply to your park unit to know that sometimes that half a mile of center line or that middle ground line goes is important for you as you're planning even within national park lands to be thoughtful about the trail experience. And then as events happen outside your borders that could indeed protect the trail that's within your, or impact the trail that's within your park, those are things that we should all be thoughtful to and planning for. And with that, I think I am ready for questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Beth and Megan. We've got one question so far in the questions box, and again, folks, feel free to add any question that you have there. Will the slideshow be up as a standalone or only the recording? So essentially, can folks get a hold of your PowerPoint?
Sure, I think that we can provide that for you.
Yeah, maybe what we can do,
and maybe we can get that to you.
Yeah. Yeah, if you guys are comfortable with it, we can just post it kind of into our internal NPS toolkit, and then I think most people will be able to access it that way. Otherwise, people can also, I entered in your email and phone information in the chat box. So folks, if you're not with the Park Service, maybe you can then just reach out directly to either Beth and Megan to see if you can get the PowerPoint that way too. Does that sound all right, Megan? Beth?
I'm good with you posting it on the Park Service site, and then if others can't get to it, please let Megan or I know.
Okay, awesome. All right, Megan, what are some of the best strategies that you and the PCTA found in bringing hesitant or skeptical partners on board with partnerships?
Yeah, well, from a nonprofit standpoint, when we did our outreach, we didn't have too much hesitancy. I know particularly nonprofits like Land Trust were really excited to hear about the prioritization and the inventory we had for the PCT, because that gave them a really good way of understanding our priorities for land acquisition and our goals. And it allowed them to see whether there was, some land trusts were really focused on a certain habitat type or a watershed or that kind of thing. And they could look and see very clearly what our priorities overlapped with, certain habitat they were looking to protect or that kind of thing. And, it gave them another way to look at their project and say why it was important. So from that standpoint, we didn't run into, so far we have not run into too much of the skeptical or, anybody unsure about wanting to partner with us. Certainly we have run into that a little bit with landowners. And, I know with certain landowners, it just takes a lot of time and a lot of energy just building a trust sometimes for them to be willing to work with you.
I'd just like to add that I think one of the most important things about a collaborative management leadership style is that you use the strengths of each partner. And so Megan shared the Stevens Pass story, which is one in which the landowner didn't want to deal with the federal government at all. And so we could not have moved forward without PCTA. But there's certainly other things that even in that situation where the federal government and our realty specialists had strengths to bring to the project as well. And so picking projects that are the right scale, that have shared interest so that there's a benefit for both partners, and then building on success. We would not have been able to do Stevens Pass without the other projects that we'd already done in the Plum Creek checkerboard area, in my mind, because what we had was a really well-oiled system in terms of working together and a lot of trust. And so those are things that I think as you build relationships with, whether it's land acquisition or just volunteers in themselves, that are really important principles.
Great. All right, here's another one from Eric in Hawaii who says, aloha, Beth. Are there working or financial assistance agreements between the Forest Service and PCTA? And then a second question actually for Megan, is the PCTA organized as a land trust?
I'll start with the first one. We have several different types of agreements with the Pacific Crest Trail Association. One of the ones that has made our lives the easiest is that I have actually a service first agreement with the BLM, between the BLM and the Forest Service, and that allows BLM funding to come to the Forest Service and then to do work on BLM lands. Offering that up to the Park Service as an opportunity for you all as well. The Forest Service has what we call a challenge cost share agreement, which is has a required match to it that enables our shared work together. And then we also have a memorandum of understanding that is between the land management agencies that the trail goes through and PCTA, which really lays out our intention for managing the trail. Megan, do you want to get the second part of that question?
Yeah. So PCTA, we don't consider ourselves a land trust. And the main reason for that is that it's not our intention to hold conservation easements ourselves, and we don't intend to hold fee title to land for the long term. Really what we're looking to do is work with our agency partners and nonprofit partners to help facilitate the real estate acquisitions along the trail. Now that being said, we don't consider ourselves a land trust, but we do have policies and procedures in place that are all in line with the Land Trust Alliance's standards and practices. And as we expanded our program for land protection work, we set it up in a way where if we ever did want to go for Land Trust Alliance accreditation, we would be following all of the same rules, best management practices that the land trusts are that are accredited under that system.
Great, thank you. All right, it looks like that's most of the questions. There was one question about that said the Connected Conservation website addresses restricted access, and that is true. It's an internal DOI website, so it is closed to the general public. But again, we do have a presence on the Network for Landscape Conservation website, and if you look in the chat box, there's a link to that website as well, where we have again recordings and some other information on their website. Before we move over to open the phone lines, I'm going to slip in a question for you both. How, the relationship, I'm just interested more generally, I guess, with how well, or how would you describe the relationship with the various timber companies that the trail runs through? My understanding is that, even California, Oregon, and Washington, it is going through Weyerhaeuser or some other one of the big private landowners, I would assume, would be some of those timber companies, and how would you characterize that relationship?
Megan, I think you can speak to what we've got going on in Northern Cal is a good place to start.
Yeah, well, one of the next projects that we're working on is actually a project that's in partnership with the Michigan-California Timber Company and the Trust for Public Land in Northern California. And, you know, in that project, it's a really good working relationship and a partnership. We are working with them to acquire approximately 10,600 acres that include 17 miles of the PCT on it. And this is one of those areas, as Beth was describing earlier, of the 10-foot wide easement. And it goes through spectacular properties. There are 10 private mountain lakes that are on these properties that technically people can't get access to because they are private land. And this is one where the company actually came and sought PCTA and the Trust for Public Lands assistance because they recognized these were really high quality recreation lands. And so I think that's a really good example of having a long-term relationship with the timber companies that the trails go through. And, you know, they decided, look, there's a lot of really good recreation going on here. We would rather turn this over to the Forest Service to manage it for that public recreation and, you know, focus our timber operations somewhere where it's really more suited to timber production. And, you know, I think the same can be said for a number of other private timber companies. Beth mentioned Plum Creek. That's another one that had a checkerboard with the PCT through it, kind of a public-private checkerboard. And they worked for many years with Trust for Public Land and just recently the Nature Conservancy to see some of those pieces along the PCT protected. So I think it's not just the timber companies, any of the private lands that the trail goes through. There's a big effort to make sure that there's a good relationship, open conversations with those private landowners.
Great. All right, so I'm going to begin to open up the phone lines here. It's going to be kind of one by one because I don't want to. Sometimes we get some. Yeah. Go for it.
As you do that, Arik had one more question. If you want me to take that one while you're opening it up, would that work?
Go for it.
So Arik's question was about liability issues and coverage for private landowners and land trusts, and that's really one of the timber companies' concerns as well, right? Is they're concerned about what happens off trail, what happens if a hiker or equestrian starts a wildfire, how do they deal with trespass, and federal government self-insured, right? And so this whole thing of how to indemnify the private landowner is a concern that you have to navigate, knowing that there is a limit. We do not have a way of indemnifying them from risk. State laws apply. There's a lot of different aspects to this, so I don't pretend to be an expert on the entire PCT and the different state laws, but going in, understanding that those are reasonable concerns for folks to have and helping them work through how we deal with fire danger, how we deal with resource damage, or illegal activities on the trail are all things that lead to success in terms of getting permits in place.
All right, for everyone, I opened up if everyone can put their phone on mute, I've opened up again the phone lines and we're getting some feedback. So if you don't have a question, please put your phones on mute. All right, so does anyone on the phone have a question for Megan or Beth? All right, well, I have one. Megan and Beth. So I just think the in terms of thinking, landscape conservation seems like that is we're thinking about, umbrella species, and then we're thinking about ecosystems, and it seems like, and we're still doing all those things, but, it seems like for the last 10 years, there's been a lot of discussions around, and focus and momentum in the conservation world around landscape conservation and what that means. And it's just apparent, obviously, to everyone that, these trails, like the Pacific Crest Trail, Appalachian Trail, Continental Divide Trail, are like these golden opportunities and galvanizing opportunities for bringing together all these different stakeholders and conservation money and attention, from the public to do good things. How have you, in terms of, managing a trail that is so big, if you had more staff and you had more capacity to work more broadly, what would you do? I'm just wondering about, like, you guys obviously are doing an awesome job, identifying these gaps, and these opportunities. But if what more could the Pacific Crest Trail? What are some additional opportunities if we had more? The Park Service, federal agencies, and PCTA, if you had more money or capacity, like what would be the next big thing for you all?
So Megan and I haven't rehearsed an answer to this. So checking in, Megan, you want me to go first or you want to go?
Yeah, you can go first.
Okay. So if I had that magic wand for the trail at this point in time, so the trails are evolving over time. The PCT is not the same trail it was in 1993 with the Golden Spike. We've made great strides in acquiring land. The rural development has significantly changed, and the drought has certainly impacted the species and viability of our high Sierra trees, right? We've got a lot of dead trees. And so it's a continuum. It's not just a point in time. But in this moment and in this point of time, my interest is to get the trail where it's on road, off of road. And so what that means in Northern California is we've got folks walking on the road because they have to cross a road bridge over the Klamath River. The trail bridge probably will cost $3 million. So these are big projects that, to really make a significant improvement, will take a lot of focused effort. The problem in Agua Dulce with the landowner that doesn't want to sell, or our opportunity in Tejon Ranch to move the trail 37 miles, all takes concentrated management and realty staff time. And so really to elevate the trail to its next place in terms of conservation, and really in many ways to catch up with what the AT has been able to do is what my next focus would be. Megan, do you have something to add?
No, I think that was well put. That was exactly where my mind went, was just all of the areas where we either have things in process for an optimum location review, which is the process that was developed through the Appalachian Trail and has been used on the PCT now, where, evaluating is the trail in the right location, both for scenic as well as safety. And so, I think there's a number of areas, especially like Tejon Ranch, where some large reroutes of the trail would be a big improvement. And so that's, land acquisition as well as just building new trail. And so that's exactly what popped into my head first too.
So one more arm of this magic wand is what protects our trails is our citizens. And so as we conserve the PCT, building that citizen stewardship base is equally as important. And so bringing strength to our volunteer program, expanding it, helping with training, that's as integral of a piece to me as the land acquisition is.
Yeah, I can believe it. All right, any other questions for those of you who have been unmuted? I couldn't unmute everyone. Everyone had to enter in their PIN number for me to unmute you. But for those who are unmuted, any questions? All right. Speak now or forever hold your peace. All right. Well, thank you, Beth and Megan. Awesome presentation and a lot of great stuff there. A lot of great takeaways. You know, and one of the big things to me again was your mention of the Service First Agreement. That this seems like a big opportunity for Park Service to work closer with a lot of other federal agencies. I know we're doing it in a lot of places, but that's just another great reminder of how important that tool is in and of itself. So thank you again, Beth and Megan. I will post the recording of this webinar presentation soon. Again, if it's not today, it'll be in the next couple days. And then our next Connected Conservation webinar is actually this coming Monday, June 25 at 3 o'clock Eastern. We'll be hosting Catherine Doyle Kappendman, and she's a PhD candidate who is studying how to best engage local stakeholders in landscape conservation. She undertook 155 interviews of practitioners of all walks of life that are involved with landscape conservation, and has developed some best practices for how to develop plans and actually make those plans not become a paper exercise that collects dust on the shelf, but to actually be something that users on the ground can implement. And so she looks at that potential disconnect or those pitfalls that are out there for actually implementing all these different landscape conservation plans that are being developed out there. So you don't want to miss it. It should be very interesting. All right. Well, thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care.